Hi, I'm Barry Stock. I'm a member of the Dan Patch Historical Society, and I'm previously the Savage City Administrator, and I am also a Savage resident. And today I have with me Will Williams, who's a longtime local historian, very knowledgeable on the topics of Savage and Dan Patch. So every year, the Dan Patch Historical Society has tried to provide a tour of our community through the Savage Recreation Department. And rather than actually go on the tour this year, we're actually going to do it right here in the City Hall Council chambers. We'll talk through it and visit a number of sites in our community, and Will give us a little bit of history. So welcome, Will. Why don't you just quickly, Will, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you know so much about Savage?
Well, I've grown up in Savage, born and raised here. Well, actually born in Minneapolis, but raised here. Went to school here all the way from first grade through 8th grade. Graduated from Burnsville High School.
In the very first graduating class?
That's correct, yes, 1958. I had a couple other honors, which I won't mention. But from there, I think I was the second one to graduate from college out of that class. The first one was my wife.
Okay, and her name is?
Janet.
Janet Williams?
Everybody knows Janet.
Oh, that's right, she's the mayor.
That's correct.
Okay. And you're the chief secretary, correct?
Well, I've been called worse.
Right.
I am the staff.
Yep.
So actually and she grew up on a dairy farm down about a mile down the road. I grew up about a block west of the St. John's Church downtown. Mm-hmm. So she was a farm girl and I was a city boy. And we had almost 300 people in town at that time. Mm-hmm. So it was really hardly anyone here.
And when did you first meet Janet? Was that like first grade or?
First grade. We started first grade together.
Okay. Wow.
And graduated together at Burnsville High School. We both started college the same year, but for some reason she got out a year ahead of me. Mm-hmm. I don't know if she was quicker or if I was slow.
Well, we won't get into that today, but why don't you tell us a little bit about the Dan Patch Historical Society and what their mission is?
Dan Patch Historical Society was created to collect and preserve and spread the word on the community of Savage, various interesting things in our history. Mm-hmm. And Dan Patch, Mr. Savage, Camp Savage, which a lot of people don't know about, and Cargill and building ships during World War II. Okay. So we do have a lot of history here, which our neighboring cities really don't have.
Well, I know as we go along on this tour today, we're going to hear a lot more about Savage and Dan Patch, but I think our first stop is going to be Hidden Valley Park.
Right. Let's
talk about that.
Hidden Valley is the gem of our park system, I believe, truly. If you say to a person that's new to town, and they don't have to really be new, have you been to Hidden Valley or where is it? They don't know where it is. Mm-hmm. They don't know what it is. And that'll be the first place that we'll go today on our tour. It used to be part of the Egan family, owned that. Mm-hmm. In the late 60s, I believe it was. Mm-hmm. Some estate money. I happened to be on the council at that point.
Okay.
And the land became available, mm-hmm. And there was money in the Lock-On grant.
Yep.
And so I wrote the proposal for it, and we did get the grant. It cost a little bit more for the property than we thought. And so consequently, the council went along with that. We did purchase that, and that was the best thing we did. And now, the reason I say it's a gem now, we'll go down there and you'll see what we've done. It's a place that, you know, in your handout that I'm giving you, it's called Egan's Resort, and it was quite famous. They would have, like, for example, the Twin Cities Masons, they would always have their annual picnic down there, and there would be 1,000 people probably down there.
Wow.
That's where we all learned to ski. They had a tow rope there and a ski slope, and we learned there and then went on skiing from there to Highland Park, and Buck Hill was not yet.
Yeah. So that Hidden Valley Park, of course, is nestled right along the Credit River in a valley, obviously. That's why it's called the valley. And you mentioned that was the Egan Resort.
Yes, that's what they called it.
So what was down there? Was it camping, or was there a bar down there?
You know, there was a bar and a tavern, a restaurant, a place to play cards. It was a tavern.
And that was in the the tavern probably went back, obviously, before you bought the park. How long ago was that tavern built there?
That's been there when my dad was young.
Okay. So, and I think too, one of the things that's interesting about that shelter down there is that the fireplace in
Yes,
that shelter was in the original tavern. Is that correct?
that's correct. That's the only thing left. There was a fire, unfortunately, that burned the tavern down, but the fireplace is still there. And the theory was, or the story was that there was a rock from every state of the 48 states at that time.
Oh, in that fireplace.
And the person that put it all together, he did masonry work and things like that. And he got to Savage through the CCC camp that became Camp Savage later,
Okay.
the homeless men's camp.
All right.
And a lot of those guys stayed because the war got going, and there was a lot of jobs at Cargill building those ships, 4,000 or 5,000,
Yeah.
and so on.
We'll get to Cargill in a second. So the expansion of Hidden Valley Park, I know during my time with the city as the city administrator, you know, one of the long envisioned dreams was, of course, to get a pedestrian trail along the entire Credit River corridor. Of course, as development happened, we weren't able to retain as much as we probably would have liked, but as you said, there's probably some land down there that we could at least expand that park and to the north, right?
Yes, to the north. We could expand it all the way to McCall Drive,
McCall Drive.
I think.
Yep, that'd be nice.
That'll be possible, I think. One of the owners already has been talking a little bit.
Good, good.
So that would be nice if it did that. Well, the importance of the valley like that, the way it's contained and everything, was very important to the indigenous people because they would take a valley like that, and then for the winter, they would have a lot of buffalo or whatever down in there, and they wouldn't let them get out either end.
Right.
And that would be their food supply and so on.
So it created a natural corral.
Absolutely, and that was typical of all the tribes across the country. They would find some place like that that's sheltered. And so,
Yeah, I don't know if any people watching have been to Hidden Valley Park, but as you said, because it's tucked down in the valley there, you're sheltered from the wind, and it's a very nice location to have a
Right.
picnic.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right, anything else on Hidden Valley? Where are we headed to next?
We're going to go out and down Lynn Avenue and take a peek where Lindbergh supposedly crashed down there.
Charles Lindbergh,
Charles.
the great aviator. First person to fly nonstop from the United States to
Ireland.
Ireland in a small plane.
Yeah.
All right, well, where did he crash?
Well, it's down, what's written is close to Cargill,
Okay.
but it wasn't across the road the way it is now.
Uh-huh.
It was farther up south of there a bit.
So on the other side of the, north side of the railroad tracks, most likely. Is that correct?
13?
Yeah.
No, south side.
Oh, south side.
I believe.
Okay. So you're saying it would have been east of Lynn Avenue?
It would have been east of Lynn,
Okay. All right.
in that area. It's called the Meadowlands then,
All right.
and there was no road through there. There was no house, there were no houses
Right.
back there. If you look at the picture, well, there's a few pictures that are around. One of them, you can see like a hill behind, and there's a fence also you can see along in there, and then you can see a barn. So, and I don't think there's any ridges like that down where
Right.
Cargill is,
Right.
you know.
So what
And-
year was that?
I think it was 1923.
23. Okay.
I wouldn't count on that. My dad and one of the Hanson girls were the first two there. They
Okay.
saw it from school, the old two-story school,
Yeah. Okay. Huh.
and they went there right away. And Lindbergh did end up staying in town here at the depot with the depot agent, who happened to be also the mayor,
At that time. Okay.
Charlie McCarthy.
All right.
And he stayed there till the part came in from, well, St. Louis. They had to, Cessna, I think, was centered in St. Louis. And that's where you had to get a couple of the parts.
So they must have towed the plane out of there to some.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Interesting. Interesting. Well, since we're down in that area to the north, we end up going into Cargill.
That's correct. We're going to go into Cargill, and I'm not sure if Mosaic is still operating in there or not, but we can drive down and almost to the river. We can't get directly to the river because levees have been set up down there, so the flood, they would try to keep it out, or most of it.
Now, let me interrupt you just, so for those that don't know, Mosaic is a branch of Cargill
Right.
that does fertilizer.
Right.
Okay.
And the importance of Cargill was that when World War II started, Cargill, of course, they operated in other places. In New York State is where they came from to build boats. So they didn't come in here just grain dealers, which they were,
Yep.
but they knew how to build ships because they had done it out in New York. And so they moved their shipbuilding, some of it here, because it was obviously in the middle of the country. And that's why we have a 9-foot channel dredged, from Twin Cities up to Savage, and it stops there.
So the Army Corps still dredges that channel.
Yes, they do.
Now it's mostly used for barge traffic, of course, but
Yep.
as you're talking about, in the 40s, 1940s, shipbuilding. How many ships did they build?
They built a total of 23.
And what was that ship called again? I forget. It wasn't a battleship. It was
No.
more of a, what would you call it?
We'll have to, AOG or something, it was they built, they were ocean going, and they were very critical in the Pacific because they were small enough to get into the islands. And basically what they carried was diesel fuel, gasoline, and potable water,
Okay, so they were tankers.
sort of.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And they built 19 of those, and then 4 others, a couple of tugs and something else. And first they didn't fire them up here, power them up. They sent them down to New Orleans, and they outfitted them down there. And then they realized, well, might as well power them up here, and we can avoid all this tug stuff.
Sure.
And if you look in your packet that I'm giving you today, you'll see that the launch of one of them, and then my favorite one is a picture of the first one going under Mendota Bridge.
Oh, okay.
And
So how many, roughly ballpark, how many employees were down there during that time?
3,000.
3,000, you think?
Yeah.
Wow.
And if anybody's interested in researching that more, Cargill and the shipbuilding, see, it was taken over by the U.S. Navy. Those U.S. Navy bases. And a lot of material is up in the Bloomington Historical Society,
Okay.
the old high school on Penn and Old Shakopee, I think it is. And the reason for that is that a lot of people from Bloomington worked there. And I gave a talk at the Masonic Home several years ago, and I ran into the widow of the naval commander that ran the place. And she was interesting to talk to.
Cool.
So that's a place to go. And, yeah.
Well, and even today, Cargill down there is still obviously operating as a grain terminal, fertilizer. They have several other divisions down there. I'm not sure what they all are, but has played a very significant impact in the growth of our community. It's kind of
Right.
interesting when you say there were 3,000 employees possibly there, because at that time the population of Savage Still was probably only about less than 1,000, I'm sure.
But you have to remember that at the CCC camp, or the homeless men's camp,
Yeah.
they probably had 3,000 to 5,000 men there.
Okay, so the
Waiting for a job.
Okay, that's not on your list. We have to tell people the CC camp, that was closer to the Savage Shakopee border, wasn't it?
No,
Where was it? It wasn't where Camp Savage was.
yes.
Oh, it is. Camp Savage and the CC were one and the same.
Well, yeah, and it was a homeless men's camp during the Depression, and it was created self-contained. They had their own sewer, and they had their own water supply. They had gymnasium, movie theater, and of course food and all the amenities of the camp there. It was a mess when the Nisi got here, because it hadn't been used for a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, they could house about 3,000-4,000. Well,
Wow.
3 to 5 is the numbers that you hear.
And that's in the area basically where FabCon,
Yeah,
that
yes.
general. So that was a big camp.
It was several hundred acres in there. Yeah.
Huh. Wow. Oh, while we're on Cargill too, we're kind of jumping around a little bit. I know not going exactly on the tour route. We'll take a little detour there. But nonetheless, let's talk a little bit about, and I don't know that you talk about it much here later on, the dike around Cargill.
Oh,
I
yes.
mean, most people don't realize that there's a large dike that was built all around Cargill. That was after the 64 flood, wasn't it? Or
65.
65, was it before or after they built that dike?
Some of it was there because of earlier flooding, but the majority of it was after that. And it wasn't, when I was a kid, we'd go down and fish in the slip where they had to slip off the river where they built the boats, of
Yep.
course.
Yep.
And then it was not there.
Okay.
But even now, if you Google it, you can see where it was
That's
there.
a pretty extensive dike system today.
Yes, today it is, yes.
All right, let's see. Let's move a little bit closer to the west, I guess we're going. And we're going to kind of get to the Savage Depot and actually where the International Stock Food Farm was. Let's talk about the depot. Right now, the depot is on the south side of Highway 13.
That's correct.
But that's not the original location.
No, it isn't. It's on the other side of Highway 13, almost straight north of where it is right now. And originally, of course, it was called Hamilton. But in those days, the railroad they would propose a name and, or someone would, and
Yep.
the railroads didn't care what they called it. They called it Hamilton, and the reason for that is the immigrants that came here from Canada, mostly all Irish to begin with, Burnsville and Savage,
Yep.
and they came through Hamilton, Ontario, And
And these guys that came from Hamilton, Ontario, had a ferry across the river somewhere.
yeah, there was a ferry there, yeah.
That was kind of the first
Yeah.
crossing.
It was a landing. Hamilton Landing is the name it became. The steamships coming up the Minnesota River. I did some research in the year 1870 concerning my great-grandfather who was in the Civil War, Second Minnesota. And I was doing the research and holy smokes, the traffic from the upper levee in St. Paul up the river was like 300 and some trips.
Wow,
So if you think about it, they're not going to be coming in December,
right,
or there's a period where they're not going to be coming.
right.
So you had a lot of steamboat traffic.
So the depot was right basically adjacent to the International Stock Food Farm, or very, very close to it, obviously.
Yes.
Probably close to its front door, I would imagine.
If you look at the second picture of the depot I have here, you can see the
Oh, there it
Taj
is.
Mahal right behind it.
Okay.
And somebody standing there, could be Mr. Savage, I don't know.
So, and onto the International Stock Food Farm, I mean, that, again, was referred to as the Taj Mahal because at the time, and I don't remember the year it was built, maybe you do, but it was quite the architectural feat for the time.
Yes. 1902, I believe he said everything is ready. He had purchased that land and built that, and purchased the land in Bloomington, whereas Valley View home up there, Masonic home it became.
Yeah.
He was a, let's see, rags to riches guy, more or less.
Well, a real entrepreneur. I mean,
Yeah,
he's
he
kind of a
was.
self-made man.
Yes, he went broke a couple times early, and then he got into the stock food farm.
Yeah.
That expanded into being a competitor of Sears, Roebuck, and Montgomery Ward's. And he was smart. He, directed his sales staff. He had about 5,000 around the world, Russia, Australia, New Zealand. They were all over the place.
I think, again, for reference sake, we're talking 1902. Most people don't realize that in 1902, we were an agrarian society. There
Yes.
were very few automobiles,
Yes.
and the major mode of transportation was horses
Correct.
or oxen, or,
Correct.
very, very few cars. And trains, actually, at that time, too, in 1902, train traffic, of course, probably really took off in the 1860s, I suppose. I don't know for sure, but
Well, even
later than that,
even earlier than that.
earlier. But again, so we're in a time where feed for animals is quite critical, right?
Yes. And, if you're harvesting wheat or whatever, oats or rye, or what are you going to do with it?
Right.
You need some mills to mill it. So, well, he was born in Ohio, grew up in Iowa, and his father was had curatives, medicines and stuff, like a vet. And so he had that knowledge of all that. It was called Doc Savage's stuff. That was his father's stuff.
Okay.
He thought that he would like to raise horses, and he tried that in Iowa and went broke. Then there was a feed mill and a mill in Iowa over by Davenport, I think, and it went bankrupt, and he and another guy bought it. Got the name International Stock Food from there.
Yeah.
And the other guy then someday took off with the money.
Ah,
So he was broke. So he decided that, yeah, as you were saying, you know, if you've got feed and you got milling, you know, where are you gonna go in 1886, 1890s? There's only one place, and that's Minneapolis, because all the milling was here. And he knew that. And so he came up here with his M.W. Savage companies, and that's how he got his start here in that business. Then he expanded into everything, you know.
yeah, so he had his major factory was down in Minneapolis.
Yes, it was.
And made all different kinds of products, not just feed for animals.
That's
You
correct.
name it, this guy
Yes.
made it
Well,
and
he-
marketed it. And it was kind of funny you mentioned Sears earlier. Of course, Sears and Roebuck catalog, that's what many of us remember that are baby boomers catalog. But M.W. Savage actually had the idea of doing a catalog before Sears, if I remember right. So he had a catalog that, again, marketed his products worldwide. People don't realize the significance.
Right. And, you know, Montgomery Ward's and Sears, I think, were based out of Chicago area. And so their main sales areas were different. They went east and south more, and he went west, followed the railroad.
Right.
And he also went to Canada, had a factory in Toronto, and had a factory in Memphis and a couple other places.
So then he had this big marketing idea to market his products. And that's kind of how we get into the story of Dan Patch, isn't it?
Well, yeah, he was always interested in horses.
Yep.
And
So did
Yeah.
he build, okay, let me back up. Did he build this international stock food farm down here before he had Dan Patch? Was that here? Okay,
Yeah.
so his interest in horses led him to build the international stock food farm.
that's correct.
All
yeah.
right.
And he had done so well in 10 years up here that he paid $60,000 for Dan Patch.
Okay.
The owner of Dan Patch wouldn't sell them to him because he figured he was going to use them for profit,
Right.
you know. And so there was a third party that bought them and then sold them to Mr. Savvy.
All right.
But yeah, he was just one of the champions he had. He had several world champions here, different ones. He always kept about a couple hundred mares there for breeding purposes because he did use them
Sure.
to make money.
Yeah. So how many horses could be stabled at the international stock food farm?
Oh, probably 250.
250. And then when he was racing horses, he raced horses too, like you said. He had a number of
Yeah.
notable racers,
Yeah.
Dan Patch, of course, being the premier. But down here, next to the International Stock Food Farm, he had a racetrack,
Yes,
covered racetrack,
correct.
which at the time had to be almost unheard of.
That's correct.
And I know I've seen aerial photos from even the 90s, maybe even the 2000s, where you could still see the footprint of the racetrack in the aerial photos.
Yes,
So,
you can. It's not hard to see.
yeah. So the M.W. Savage had all this interest. His factory's in Minneapolis. He had a house in Minneapolis.
Yes,
But then his place on the other side of the river in Bloomington, which was later the Masonic home, that was like then his summer house.
that's correct.
So he'd come down here to retreat and have his summer house looking down at his stables.
He also had a home on Minnetonka.
Oh, yeah, within a minute, I didn't know
Yeah, and
that.
his downtown home was, well, it was like, it was almost like you were looking at some kind of a castle or something, down by the Art Museum.
Okay.
There is one there that still exists isn't, but it's very similar,
Similar.
to what it would have been. Yeah, he had that, and he had the place on Minnetonka and Valley View up here on the bluff, so he could see everything down there. And there was a 1 mile outside track, and then there was a half-mile enclosed heated track, so he could run them all year long.
You know, we could probably talk all afternoon here just about Dan Patch. I think that's another show for a later date, because today we're just doing the bus tour, but the story of Dan Patch is quite incredible. And I should mention that over at the Savage Library, in the Heritage Room, you can see quite a few of the products that M.W.
Yes.
Savage had,
Yeah.
as well as the catalog itself.
Yeah.
And then also in the front entryway, when you first go into the library, there's a model of the Taj Mahal. So
Correct,
I want to
yeah.
encourage everybody to take a look at that. And that's what we're talking about right now. But we better move on. We're going to move to the south side of the road now. Continental Machines.
Continental Machines. Actually, they moved out here right before World War II, I think about 39. And it was actually the Minneapolis Tool Company, I think maybe was the name of it.
Yep.
But they moved out from there, and they did, well, their big name was Dual,
Yeah.
yeah, products. Actually, I've just found out a few years ago, they made turrets for ships and for planes and anything that tanks. And then I didn't know that. When we were kids, we always said, well, they made machine guns there. Actually, it was turrets. And I didn't know that till
Wow.
he told me that.
Well, so they were a major employer of
Yes.
our community for many, many, many years. And I can even speak a little bit to that myself, because my dad actually worked at Continental Machines for over
Yep.
25 years.
Yep.
And I know that in its heyday, it had over 1,000 employees.
Oh, yeah.
And you mentioned saws. They're most notable for Dual saws. They
Yep.
made saws that cut through
Anything.
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 I remember one commercial that they cut through a Ford pickup, cut a Ford pickup in half right down at the plant. So that is, again, today, there's still some remnants of Continental Machines down in that area. The major part of it no longer exists, but the hydraulics division, as things
Yeah.
changed, they went into hydraulics. and
Hydraulics, yeah.
that division, I think, is still in
It
Savage.
is, yeah.
Cool. Well, let's move on to West then. Let's get back to that Camp Savage. We talked a little bit about that briefly, but again, let's talk about some of the things. You talked about it being a CCC camp, Civilian Conservation Corps camp, but it was also very instrumental in World War II. Again, I don't think people have a clue about
No.
what went on down there. So why don't you get into a little bit of that?
No, they don't. I'm going back to, you mentioned that it was located between Savage and Shakopee. Well, if you go toward Shakopee, there was more installation, different, like Murphy's Landing.
Oh, sure.
so
Okay.
on.
Yep.
Different things, secret things, I suppose,
Yep,
during
yep.
the war.
Yep.
But, yeah, Camp Savage was a Japanese language school. It was started actually in Presidio out by San Francisco in 1941, before Pearl Harbor. Yeah, because they realized that, we better
Get ready.
have some people that understand the Japanese language and
Yeah.
so on. And then, of course, Pearl Harbor hit, and they decided to better get it into the middle of the country somewhere. And there was 2 spots that the person came out with across the country. Iowa or Minnesota would be the 2 best places for the Nisei as far as discrimination and being treated well and so on.
Okay, you got to stop right there, because again, you mentioned, I know what it means, but I'm sure no one else. What is Nisei? What is that?
That's the first generation American.
First generation Japanese American.
It'd be the children of the immigrants.
Okay, all right. So they're
I
called
believe I have
Nisei.
that right.
Yeah, so they're called Nisei or Nisei.
Nisei, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we had Japanese language camp here in Savage. What did they do?
Well,
What do you mean? They just teach people Japanese or what?
So, yeah, it was a language camp. And the Japanese, what they did was, or what was typical of the ones that came to Hawaii or California or
Yeah.
Washington, wherever, was they would send the children, when they graduate from high school, they would send them for a year back to Japan to learn the culture. And some of those ended up in the school, some did not, because they were very suspected of,
Yeah, yeah,
not being loyal to the United States.
sure.
But they were in the Army, the guys that were here. They would join an Army, and there was a lot of them. And the problem with the Japanese language is that there's there's an everyday Japanese street talk,
Yep.
and then there's a formal Japanese language, and then there's a military, which is they're all entirely different. And so these guys had to be taught the military.
And so their job here was partly to decipher code or try to intercept messages or?
Yep, all of that. And interrogate prisoners and stuff they ran into over there. But yeah, all of that. And they put up a radio tower down here too, because they figured, well, we should get some shortwave something and pick up some stuff from Tokyo, and they did then. There's a lot of examples of where they initially cracked that code, yeah.
So again, a lot of people don't realize because technology is so different today than it was in the 40s, but the messages or the communications that were intercepted were then taken here, deciphered, and then reported back to the front line or wherever, Pentagon, wherever they went with that information.
Well, you can, take the Battle of Midway, which is a big victory for us. And the reason it was is because of those guys.
Yeah. Okay.
And the general, I think it was Yamamoto, he was flying out to one of the islands and he didn't make it. He was shot down because they were waiting for him. They had naval fighter planes way high. And they finally told him, well, he's ready to land at this particular place, and went down, got him.
I know that there's still a lot of the Japanese that worked at Camp Savage continue to live in this South Metro area and over at the community college over
Normandale.
Normandale Community College. There's actually what would you call it?
Japanese garden.
Japanese gardens, and a lot of the influence from those people that worked here were instrumental in getting that over there.
That's true. Twin City area has one of the largest Japanese American cultural groups. And the reason is a lot of them came back and a lot of them stayed. And the Normandale, the Japanese gardens behind there was a project between the Japanese cultural group and Bloomington Flower Grove.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
And that's how I found out about Camp Savage. I mean, I didn't know it. Well, I knew Camp Savage was there. I didn't understand it all.
Right.
But, I would go there once in a while with my grandpa when I was really young. I could just barely remember that because my mom ran a grocery store and my grandpa would deliver groceries out there.
And I know that I'll just call them barracks, the housing buildings that the soldiers lived in.
I know it well.
Yeah, a number of them were actually moved out of there into downtown Savage.
Yeah.
I think there's still at least one downtown Savage, and I know there's one in Lakeville as well. They moved one to Lakeville that is actually being renovated for some community recreation purposes. I can't remember what, but yeah.
That's true. When they finally decommissioned the camp in '46, Then they had an auction, and people could buy the barrack buildings, and my dad did. And, I lived in one.
You lived in one?
Yeah.
Okay. That I did not know.
That was a lot nicer than the house that we moved from.
Okay.
That was a remodeled chicken coop.
Okay. Yeah.
We didn't have a lot of money.
People don't realize how things have changed over the last 50
Yeah.
years.
Yes. Well, you know, you ever heard of Warren Butler?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Warren Butler was killed over there on flying the hump. That's what they called it over there, going from Burma to China.
Yep. Yep.
And they would get their supplies, Merrill's Marauders would get their supplies by air. And the planes, they wouldn't land. They would just come in and drop supplies.
So that's why Warren Butler Park, which is right next to M.W. Savage Elementary, is named after that
Warren Butler.
Warren Butler, who was killed in World War
Yes, he was.
II.
He was killed. He was trained, well, the family broke up in Savage when they lived here, and Warren went to live with my grandparents. Because I had an uncle that was about his age. And
Okay.
anyway, so, and then when he was in the service in World War II, he sent a lot of telegrams and cards and stuff to my
Sure.
grandparents.
Yep. Yep.
And the last one he sent was, he said I'm somewhere, how did he say that? Somewhere in the east. He was trained on, they had a new navigational thing, and plus the bombing thing. Can't remember the name of it, but, so he was trained on operating that.
Okay.
A very important guy. But anyway, the plane crashed, and
That was that.
yeah. So that's where his name came from.
One of many, 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 many people killed in World War II. All right, let's get back on the bus. Now we're going to head out through the business park on our way to Boiling Springs.
Boiling Springs.
But as we go through the business park, which is on the west side of Highway 13, actually I know a lot about that too, because when I first came to Savage around 97, I was the economic development director, and we wanted to increase our industrial development tax base. So the city played an instrumental role in acquiring about 210 acres down there, which we then sold off to a variety of businesses, partnered with Opus and such. And now we have a very nice, thriving business park, which has added to the tax base significantly,
Yes.
as well as created a significant number of jobs. But I think as we cross Eagle Creek here on the bridge, one of the things we had to do when we developed the business park was maintain a 200-foot aquatic management corridor along the creek. And the reason why we had to do that is because Eagle Creek has one of the only trout streams in the Twin Cities metro area that actually produces trout.
Right.
So now we're going to go to the source of the Eagle Creek, which is pretty much Boiling Springs.
That's the western half.
Yeah, the western branch.
Yeah, there's
Correct.
2 branches there, but just south of that bridge that you mentioned. One goes, that way, and one goes that way, and that's Boiling Springs over there. And so we'll go over there. Yeah, you mentioned that's the nicest park that we have, business park.
Yeah.
And people don't know it's there.
Right.
No, they don't. It's a great place.
Yeah.
And anyway, yeah, if we go over there and we'll see Boiling Springs, and what it is it's a hydraulic or a hydrological thing, hydraulics, I guess, yeah.
Yep.
The pressure, there's a layer of clay or something, and if the pressure gets enough, then it bubbles up. And I've seen it this high, probably.
Yep.
My son has seen it probably as high as the back of this. And, most of the time you just see kind of bubbling come up.
Yeah,
And
I've
it's-
seen it too. I've seen it. It kind of gurgles
Yeah.
almost.
And it's
And-
red.
Yeah, and I know that years ago, it regularly was,
Oh, yeah.
you know, like I won't say a geyser, but it's because a geyser goes a lot higher,
Yeah.
but it went up at least 3-4 feet high, bubbling, and that's why they
Oh, yeah.
call it boiling springs. It looks like the water's boiling.
That's correct.
Now, if you step in there, you would disappear.
Probably.
We don't want to know, do we? But there have been stories that, you know,
I don't-
carts and animals have been lost when they
Well,
went into that boiling springs.
the Mid-Wacaton story on that is because of all the minerals, iron, I suppose, a lot of it gives it that color.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes up, and that, of course, would remind you of blood.
Yeah.
Okay, one of the last battles between the Ojibwe and the Dakota was right about there. And the Ojibwe were supposed to be on the other side of the Minnesota River. They weren't supposed to be on this side.
Okay.
And some of them came over by Chief Shakopee's place.
Yeah.
And his son was Eagle,
Yeah.
and consequently Eagle Creek. But there was a battle, and Dakota won it, Mid-Wacaton. And that's, the blood still comes up from the,
So it's from the Metawakan standpoint, it's a sacred area.
it is a sacred area, and if you go there, occasionally you might see pieces of cloth in a tree or something.
Yeah.
And that is a way that they honor the dead.
Honor, yeah.
Yeah. So you may see that, I've seen that.
Well, and this upswelling of water, which creates the boiling springs, of course, it's ice cold water, and that's why the trout stream, in order to have trout, you really need to have cold, clear water, and hence the reason why there was some trout in there. Now,
Right.
most of the trouts don't go up that far anymore, but I know that the city with the DNR has done some, I guess they got counts.
Restoration
Yeah, they've
projects.
done restoration projects along that area, and there are still reproducing trout in that trout stream, so
Oh, yeah.
it's kind of interesting.
Yes, they're German brown trout,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
You know, the other branch too, up in there, it gets pretty swampy.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's producing very cold water also.
I'm kind of going off base here again, off topic a little bit, but I know you remember this. Much of that area on the east side of Highway 13, as you go down the hill towards the valley, is wetland. And it's because of that's where the Savage Fen Wetland Complex is located. And I know you did quite a bit of hunting in that area. There was a lot of pheasants in that area, even when I was growing up. But Savage, down below in the valley, has a very high water table, very high water table.
Yeah,
And that's what feeds that Fen Wetland Complex. And which makes it really unique is the calcium, as the rainwater on top of the hill seeps down,
Yeah.
it comes out at the base of the bluff and is very calcium rich, and that creates very unique plant conditions. So that's why when people ask, how come there's no development in that area, is because it's all the Savage Fen Wetland Complex, and it's off base. In fact, I know probably when you were on the council, there was a plan to turn much of that area into a business park because Fabcon came in around that time, and the city put in water and sewer even in that area, and then the Wetland Protection Act happened,
Yeah.
and then much of that area was off base for any future development.
I think Fabcon was a little before my time.
Yeah, was it? Yeah, okay.
Couple
As a
years.
as a council member.
Yeah, and there was several streams, you know, coming out of there.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people wonder why we don't have very many roadway connections north and south, and why we always, go down through Savage, through the 1-lane bridge, and then the 2-lane bridge, and then Highway 13. That's basically our only north-south connections to 13 going through the valley. And the reason is because we can't get a roadway through the Savage Fen. So, a little more history there for everybody. All right, we're going to go over to the Glendale Cemetery. Okay, we're coming up the hill now, and Glendale Cemetery is on the north side of McCall Drive,
Correct.
west of Highway 13.
Yep, just about by Boone Avenue.
Yeah. And why is it called Glendale?
Well, that's a good question.
Because it's Glendale Township. I know that one.
Why is it Glendale Township?
That I do not know. Maybe you do. Well, probably because back in the days, the fens were called glens, right?
Yeah, Irish.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll go by the church there. That was one of the plantations, or whatever you want to call it, of the Pond brothers.
Oh, okay.
Well, as a
The Pond brothers from Shakopee, they were missionaries.
Yes,
right?
they were
Okay.
Presbyterian,
Yep.
and that was their job. Was they were out establishing parishes. So, and the Ponds were from Bloomington, really,
Okay.
and you can still see where they lived there. But yeah, and you had the structure in Shakopee. You also had a Presbyterian church there, and the Catholic Church, St. John's, was down here. That was basically all Irish. And then this Presbyterian was more Scottish.
So was there like a divide? The east
Oh,
side
yeah.
was the Catholics
I
and the
think
west
so.
side was the
You
Presbyterians?
might suspect that. Because there was a fire on St. John's burned,
Oh.
and then there happened to be a fire at the Presbyterian church
Oh.
that burned. Then there was another one at the St. John's. That's when the Archbishop said, that's enough of this. You're going to have to move down to Hamilton, or at least it gets some protection.
Uh-huh.
So that's why it moved downtown. But yeah, and it was a Presbyterian, and the cemetery is the McCall heirs are in charge of that.
Okay.
They pass it along from generation to generation, take care of it. And you have to, I mean, if I wanted to go get buried there, I probably wouldn't be able to.
So you have to be, basically, I don't want to call it a private cemetery, but I don't know what other words to use. In order to be buried there, you have to have some relation to an ancestor?
Yes.
Okay.
To McCall's or Marshall.
Okay.
That's why, we'd always go there on Memorial Day, and, well, I knew a lot of McCalls anyway. And I was looking around there one day, and I saw Otto Hansen, and I thought, well, that's a little strange up there.
Yeah.
And so I talked to Carol Sue Gutowski, who was
Yeah.
a Hansen, and she said, well, yeah, that was her great-grandfather.
Oh, okay.
And I said, well, how did he get up there in that cemetery? Well, she wasn't sure. But
So the McCalls, let's just talk a little bit about the McCalls, because we're on McCall Drive is where the cemetery is, and it's obviously named after the McCall family, which
we're on McCall property right here.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that much of the City Hall campus was on part of the McCall farm. Pretty much, I don't know how much of the area, you would better than I, but all along McCall Drive, both north and south side, from Highway 13 to the City Hall campus was McCall family farms.
Why is that?
Why was it the McCall family?
Why is it that way?
I don't know. You
Okay.
tell me. That's what you're here for.
Well, you see, well, as I mentioned, they were Scot-Irish,
Okay.
and so they wouldn't get along too good with the other Irish, Catholic.
Catholic Irish.
Anyway.
Okay, yeah.
But the McCalls weren't here right then, early. You see, in 1837, the treaty with the Mid-Wacaton was none of the settlers, Europeans, could be within 4 miles of the river. And consequently, McCalls were in Prior Lake first.
Okay.
Neil McCall was one. And you know, that treaty was forever, you know, from 1837 to 1851. That's forever, 14 years.
Back in those days, yeah.
And
it
then
was
they,
one of many treaties that were
a
probably
new
broken,
treaty,
right? Yeah.
and they didn't have the restriction on staying 4 miles away from the river.
Okay.
And that's when all those McCalls moved back this way towards the river.
Okay.
And plus some other people,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
basically, like I said, in Savage, it's pretty much McCall all the way. So
Interesting.
that's the story on that.
I didn't know that that treaty had a
Oh, yeah.
role in where people could live. Well, it seems to make sense. But like we've talked, many treaties
Yeah, and then they,
went by the wayside,
they put them,
unfortunately.
you know, up towards Granite Falls.
Right, right. Okay, well, we're gonna get back on the bus. We're gonna head back towards City Hall, and we're gonna swing by the hanging tree. What's the hanging tree?
Well,
Hopefully that's
one
not
of
what
the-
that really means.
In the day, the indigenous people would prefer to bury their dead down by Battle Creek or Mounds Park in St. Paul,
Okay.
that area. Because the confluence of the Minnesota and the Mississippi and the St. Croix, that was like their universe, you know?
Yeah. Again, very
And,
sacred area.
So in the winter, if you had someone die, of course, you wouldn't be able to, you know, take them down there and bury them. So they put them in the tree,
Oh.
hang the body in the tree, and then after, this was a part of a religious belief also about the ravens or the crows would come and take, you know, they would clean the-
Scavengers, yeah.
yeah, and take it to heaven, or,
Oh.
and then they would collect the bones, and the person would have some personal possession, and they would bury those with them. They'd prefer to do it down, as I said, down there, but couldn't always do that. There was Indian mounds in town here.
So, I mean, it sounds kind of morbid in a way, but by today's standards, obviously, but we're talking about spiritual tradition
Yeah.
going back thousands of years, probably. All right. You know, I want to back up just a little bit. So whatever happened to the Taj Mahal? The International
Actually,
Stock Food
it ended up, I think in the 20s, maybe 28, fire.
burnt down
Yeah.
again. Okay.
When we were young, there was a couple farms there, you know, also.
Yep.
Okay, and one of those farms was still there, and that was Muhlenhart's.
So, you know, you mentioned a number of fires here that probably happened, you know, between 1860 and 1920. Well, we have to remember that, again, the mode of transportation wasn't what it was today, and the means of fighting fires was the bucket brigade.
Right, burlap sack.
Yeah. So,
I did that. We'd always help out,
Yeah. Huh.
because the fen would always burn
Yep.
once a year at least,
Yeah.
and a lot of times twice.
All right. Well, so where was this hanging tree?
Just down the road here, about a half mile.
Okay.
Archie McCall's house is still there,
Oh, okay.
kind of behind it.
All right.
I think it's still there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Big oak tree. Yeah.
I don't
All
know.
right. I think it's an oak tree.
Yeah, rural.
Fir oak. All right, so we're gonna now head back to the Savage Library where our heritage room is, and as we speak right now, there's some expansion going on at the library where our heritage room, as well as some areas within the library, are gonna be remodeled. And our heritage room is going to be slightly relocated to where the periodical section is of the library, and it's gonna be about double in size.
Yes,
So
yeah.
I think we need to take a moment to thank the city of Savage elected officials for
Yes.
allowing us to continue to have space there to
Right.
address not only the history of Dan Patch, but M.W. Savage and all the other cast of characters that we have in our community throughout the years. So,
Well, I talked that up. I belong to the Twin Cities Civil War Roundtable, and I take a trip every year with a few guys. But every time I'd go down south, you know, and they say in Chickamauga, okay. So you go into the library, and there's always a room with the history in all those libraries.
Right.
So I told the head of the libraries at that time who had to do that. She said, yeah. And, well, Don Egan too, he said when they built the library, they have to preserve the history somehow.
Yeah, there's more than just the memorabilia from M.W. Savage's products but there's all kinds of stuff over in that library. You name it. If you want to spend time doing research, you can find a lot of great information about
You can.
not just Cargill, Continental Machines, M.W. Savage Elementary. We could go on the city liquor operations, the parks, you name it. There's
Yep.
just all kinds of information. The families, why certain roads are named Egan Drive. You mentioned the Egan family.
Right.
So again, we could talk Muhlenhart Road, Muhlenhart's.
Williams Drive in Burnville.
Williams Drive. Who's that named after?
It is
Williams family, again, goes way back. Well, there's all kinds of history we could talk about today on different topics, but I think we should just end the tour now, and thank you, Will, for being with me
I
today.
think so.
And we'll have to come back and talk about some of these other interesting sidebars that we could get into.
Yeah, it would be a lot of them.
All right. Thank you.